Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a wild story of billion-dollar hype, a spectacular collapse, and the really controversial idea that playing video games could actually be a full-time job. This is the story of blockchain gaming.
You know, for a little while there, this question wasn't just some daydream. It was the billion-dollar promise behind a whole new movement called blockchain gaming, and it completely captured the imagination of investors and players all over the world.
Okay, so at its heart, the idea was, and this is pretty revolutionary, what if you could truly own your in-game items? I mean, not just rent them from some big company, but actually own them. This one question, well, it became the foundation for everything that came next.
And that's exactly what blockchain games were trying to pull off. They use tech like non-fungible tokens, you probably know them as NFTs, to give players real, verifiable ownership of pretty much everything, from unique characters to their own virtual plots of land. So you had these early games like CryptoKitties, which kind of proved the whole concept of digital scarcity could work. But boy, did they expose some big problems too. Like at one point it was so popular, it literally clogged up the entire Ethereum network. But really, it was the next wave of games that was going to turn this niche idea into a global gold rush. And that brings us to this new model called play to earn, or P2E for short. The premise was incredibly simple and, let's be honest, pretty seductive. The more you play, the more real-world value you can earn. For a hot second, it really felt like the future had arrived.
The absolute poster child for this whole movement was a game called Axie Infinity. I mean, at its peak, you had these incredible stories coming out about players in countries like the Philippines who were reportedly earning enough to cover their rent and food, all during the chaos of the pandemic.
But of course, there was a catch, a big one. The cost to even start playing these games got ridiculously high. So this whole system of scholarships popped up, where big gaming guilds would buy the expensive assets and then lend them out to new players, but in exchange for a huge cut of their earnings. It basically created this system of, like, digital landlords. So just as the hype was hitting its absolute peak, a massive backlash started to build. And we're not talking about just a few grumpy people online. This was coming from the very heart of the gaming community, from players, from developers, and from critics.
Okay, so the complaints were all over the map. A lot of people felt the economies were just Ponzi schemes, needing a constant flood of new players to pay out the old ones. Others pointed out that the tech was a disaster for the environment and a breeding ground for scams, which led to the biggest accusation of all, that these weren't really games. They were just financial schemes wearing a video game costume. And maybe the most brutal criticism? They just weren't fun to play. And look, this wasn't just players being skeptical. A 2022 survey from the Game Developers Conference showed that the people who actually make games for a living, well, they weren't buying it. A whopping 70% of them wanted absolutely nothing to do with it.
It got to the point where even the bigwigs in traditional gaming started speaking out. The head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, flat out said that a lot of it felt more exploitative than it felt like entertainment, and a lot of people in the industry agreed with him.
And you better believe this backlash had real-world consequences. Big publishers like Ubisoft and the developers of the Stalker series tried to jump on the bandwagon, and the fan outrage was so intense, so immediate, that they had to backpedal, and fast.
So it turns out the whole play-to-earn model wasn't just unpopular. It was basically a house of cards, legally and economically speaking. It was just a minefield waiting to go off. Yeah, legal experts started pointing out three huge, and I mean huge, problems. First, giving players tokens that could gain value looked a lot like issuing illegal stocks. Second, by holding everyone's money and moving it around, these platforms were basically acting like unlicensed banks. And third, they were a perfect setup for financial crimes like money laundering. And then, the whole thing was hit by security failure of catastrophic proportions. The big one was a hack of Axie Infinity's network in 2022 that saw over $600 million stolen. An attack like that just completely shattered trust in the ecosystem and sent its economy into a death spiral. Okay, so after that spectacular crash, you'd think the whole industry would just vanish, right? Well, not exactly. Instead, it's trying to pull off a major pivot, a complete rethinking of what blockchain gaming could, or maybe what it should, be. What's happening now is this really interesting pivot, a big shift in how they're thinking about all this. The whole idea is moving away from play to earn and towards this new model called play and earn. And the whole point is to put fun before finance.
So the thinking behind play and earn is pretty simple, really. First, make a great game. Make something people actually want to play just because it's enjoyable. Any of the earning stuff, any of the ownership, that's all just a bonus, a secondary perk, not the main reason you're there.
Now, even with all these very public failures, and let's be honest, a ton of skepticism that's still out there, some major companies are still quietly exploring what this tech could mean for gaming. They're just being a lot quieter about it these days.
The journey of blockchain gaming is a classic tech boom and bust story. But its story isn't over yet, which really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Was this whole thing just a flawed financial experiment, or is it possible for developers to rebuild that trust and prove there's a real, entertaining future for gaming on the blockchain, one that's about more than just the money?